Thousands of protesters took to the streets of France on Saturday to demonstrate against and compulsory vaccination rule for healthcare workers. Some 160,000 people protested against a bill that will require everyone to have a special virus pass to enter restaurants and mandating COVID-19 vaccinations for workers in some selected professions. The pass attests that the holder has either been fully vaccinated, has tested negative over the previous 24 hours, or has recovered from COVID in the last 6 months. The new measure was announced last week by President Emmanuel Macron in a bid to boost vaccinations as the country battles a surge in coronavirus cases fueled by the highly contagious Delta variant.
Alors je n'ai pas envie que ma fille ait une injection qui fasse que ça puisse dérégler son cycle menstruel. Donc je n'ai pas confiance dans un vaccin parce que je sais qu'il peut y avoir des conséquences fâcheuses. Nous sommes encore dans les essais cliniques, donc nous ne savons pas si à moyen ou à long terme nous aurons des effets indésirables, que ce soit sur les adultes d'ailleurs ou les enfants ou les adolescents.
French anti-riot police fired tear gas as brief clashes erupted when protesters reached the Champs-Élysées and the Gare Saint-Lazare railway station. Across France, protests were planned in cities including Marseille, Montpellier, Nantes, and Toulouse. French lawmakers are due to vote this weekend on this COVID health pass bill. Meanwhile, in Italy, thousands of demonstrators gathered in Rome and several other Italian cities to protest against government's requirement of a so-called Green Pass, an extension of the European Union's digital COVID certificate to enter many venues. Prime Minister Mario Draghi's government approved a decree on Thursday ordering the use of green passes starting from August the 6th. These passes will allow access to gyms, museums, movie theaters, and the inside of restaurants and other public venues.
Sono qui perché non voglio il Green Pass, perché voglio essere libera di scegliere quello che voglio o non voglio fare.
Hundreds of anti-COVID protesters also staged demonstrations in London on Saturday against what they describe as an erosion of their civil liberties. Demonstrators say UK government's track and trace app is limiting their movements, with more than 600,000 told to self-isolate to prevent further COVID spread. The protests come a week after most coronavirus restrictions in England were lifted. Meanwhile, in Greece, police used tear gas and water cannon to disperse protesters in central Athens, demonstrating against COVID-19 vaccinations. Groups of protesters fired petrol bombs at riot police as they marched near the parliament. Saturday's demonstration was the third in 10 days, which has been prompted by a government decision to impose mandatory inoculations for healthcare workers.
Meanwhile, thousands of Australians participated in the anti-lockdown protests in Sydney, defying public health orders. Nearly about 3,000, mostly masked-less people, marched through Australia's most populous city, waving Australian flags and also chanting. The demonstrators flouted rules of non-essential travel and public gatherings just a day after the authorities suggested that restrictions could actually remain in place until the month of October. The protest turned violent fairly quickly as the protesters threw potted plants and water bottles at the police officers. Some others physically assaulted the police horses, and at least about 57 people were arrested at the protest. The demonstration came as COVID-19 case numbers in the state have reached another record, with at least 163 new infections in the last 24 hours.
Anyone who feels like what's happening with the COVID restrictions is just completely removed from reality and removed from being in touch with what's on the ground. Please know you're not alone. There's a lot of people who agree with you. We're here just to speak and to let our voices be heard and nothing else.
Now, after escaping much of the early pandemic unscathed, around half of Australia's 25 million people are now in a state of lockdown across several cities. Now, there is growing anger at the restrictions and also the government's failure to provide adequate vaccine supplies. New South Wales, Australia's most populous state, has been 4 weeks into a lockdown to contain an outbreak of the Delta variant of the coronavirus. The state appears poised to extend a lockdown that was due to end on the 30th of July, despite its struggle with a spike of infections. Most of the Delta variant, Australia has managed to keep its epidemic largely under control. About 15% of the Australians have been fully vaccinated, a rate that is well behind many other developed nations. The government is, of course, targeting full vaccination of the adult population by the end of this year. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.